When my stepmother slammed her fork down and said, "Give your brother your room, or pack your bags and go," she thought she was backing me into a corner. My stepbrother sat there with a smug grin, already imagining his new setup, while my dad just stared at his plate in silence. They expected me to cry, plead, or start a fight. Everyone at that table thought I was helpless. What they didn't know is that I had signed the deed to the entire house just 3 days prior. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply wiped my mouth with a napkin, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Okay. My name is Clara. At 26, I work as a corporate accountant, meaning I spend my days analyzing spreadsheets, tracking balances, and spotting irregularities that other people desperately try to hide. I'm trained to stay calm under pressure, to look at facts rather than emotions. But nothing in my professional training could have prepared me for the sheer audacity sitting across from me at my own dining table. "Give your room to your brother by tomorrow, or pack your bags and get out of my house." Evelyn didn't just yell those words. She slammed her fork onto her china plate so hard it shattered into 3 pieces. Shards of porcelain skittered across the polished wood. My father, Mark, sitting right next to her, didn't even flinch. He kept his eyes locked on his steak, cut off a meticulous bite, and whispered, "She's right, sweetie. Family comes first. Julian needs a fresh start." I sat in dead silence, looking at the 3 of them. Evelyn was breathing heavily, her face flushed with a triumphant sneer. Sitting beside her was my 28-year-old stepbrother, Julian, smirking quietly while swirling his glass of wine. He'd just failed his 3rd business venture in 2 years, a disastrous crypto startup financed entirely by maxing out credit cards, and now he needed a place to live rent-free. Evelyn's solution? Force me out of the spacious master suite, a room I had personally paid $20,000 to renovate with hardwood floors and an ensuite bath, so her golden child could move in. They expected me to take the tiny, windowless storage room in the basement, or leave altogether. They thought they were backing a quiet, grieving daughter into a corner. They mistook my composure for weakness. "I see," I said, my voice eerily calm as I wiped my hands with a napkin. "You want me out of the master suite by tomorrow." "It's not a request, Clara," Evelyn snapped, leaning forward. "It's my house, and I decide who sleeps where." I looked at my father one last time, giving him a chance to show even a spine's worth of integrity. He just avoided my gaze. "All right," I replied softly, pushing my chair back. "I'll think about how we should handle this." As I walked up the stairs to my room, I felt a cold, sharp focus settling over me. Evelyn thought she was making a power move. What she didn't realize was that the house she was so eager to kick me out of didn't belong to my father, and it certainly didn't belong to her. It belonged entirely to me. To understand how I ended up sitting at a dining table being threatened with eviction from my own home, you have to understand my late grandmother, Eleanor. Grandma Eleanor was a sharp, fiercely independent woman who had bought this craftsman-style house back in the late 90s. She raised me here after my mother passed away when I was just 6 years old. My father, Mark, was always a terrible steward of money, chasing get-rich-quick schemes, taking out sketchy loans, and living paycheck to paycheck. Knowing his history, Eleanor knew better than to leave him a single brick. When she passed away 5 years ago, her will was crystal clear. The title deed, the land, and every square foot of the property were willed directly to me upon my 21st birthday, completely bypassing my father. When my father married Evelyn a year later, I felt sorry for him. He was broke, and she was a ruthless social climber who assumed he came from old money. Out of a misguided sense of family duty, I allowed them to move in. We struck a verbal agreement. They could live there rent-free to help my father get on his feet, provided they covered basic utilities while I handled the heavy lifting, the property taxes, structural repairs, and insurance. For 4 years, I tolerated Evelyn's subtle microaggressions. She reorganized my mother's kitchen, criticized how I dressed, and slowly began acting like the lady of the manor. She treated me like an unwelcome tenant in a house my grandmother had built for me. But I kept my head down, focused on my career, and put $20,000 of my hard-earned savings into turning the master bedroom into my own peaceful sanctuary. That night, After the shattered plate incident, I went straight to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand, unlocked a heavy metal fireproof safe, and pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside sat the original title deed in my name, the certified land registry documents, and 4 years' worth of stamped property tax receipts bearing my signature. Evelyn believed she held all the cards because my father's name was on the mailbox. She had no idea that the legal foundation beneath her feet was about to completely crumble. The next morning, I woke up early, packed my work bag, and left for the office without saying a word. But when I returned at 5 o'clock, I discovered that Evelyn hadn't waited for my answer. Standing in the hallway were 4 heavy cardboard boxes filled with my clothes, books, and personal belongings. The heavy oak door to my master suite was locked shut. Evelyn had called a locksmith while I was at work, changed the deadbolt, and moved Julian's messy suitcases right onto my rug. I walked into the kitchen, where Evelyn was pouring herself a glass of wine. She turned around, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered across her face. "I told you, Clara. Julian needs a space. Your things are in the hallway. You can move into the basement room tonight, or you can take your boxes and find an apartment." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked at her, pulled out my phone, and said, "Understood." I grabbed my bag, left the house, and drove straight to Midtown. An hour later, I was sitting in the high-rise office of Sarah Lynn, a seasoned real estate attorney and a close friend of my late grandmother. I laid out everything on her desk, the original title deed, my tax receipts, and the photo I had just taken of my belongings dumped in the hallway. Sarah scanned the documents, her eyebrows rising higher with every page. "They changed the locks on your own property and dumped your possessions? That's an illegal self-help eviction, Clara. But it gets worse." Sarah turned her laptop screen toward me, showing a local real estate portal. A active listing popped up, my house, complete with photos of the living room and garden, listed for sale at $750,000. The agent on the listing was a notoriously shady broker known for skipping due diligence. Evelyn had secretly tried to put my home on the market, convinced that my father was the true owner and that I would just quietly slip away. "She's committing full-blown fraud," Sarah said, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "We can stop the listing immediately. But more importantly, it's time to officially serve them." By Thursday evening, I was ready to execute my plan. I called a family reconciliation dinner, framing it as a peace offering. I texted Evelyn, my father, and Julian, claiming I wanted to apologize for the tension, accept the reality of the situation, and work out a reasonable compromise regarding the house and Julian's long-term living arrangements. When I arrived home at 7 o'clock, the atmosphere in the dining room was thick with arrogance. Evelyn had cooked a lavish meal, clearly feeling victorious. Julian was lounging in his chair, already acting like the rightful master of the house, while my father looked relieved that his daughter had seemingly yielded without a drawn-out fight. "I'm glad you've finally come to your senses, Clara," Evelyn said, pouring a round of drinks as we sat down. "Family isn't about rigid boundaries. It's about making sacrifices for one another. Julian is building his future, and he needs a stable foundation." "I couldn't agree more," I said smoothly, taking a small sip of water. Evelyn smiled tightly and slid a folded 2-page document across the tablecloth toward me. It was a makeshift, typed-up sublease agreement she had drafted herself. "Since you're staying in the small basement guest room, we've decided to charge you $800 a month in rent," she announced smugly, resting her elbows on the table. "That will help cover Julian's living expenses while he gets his new business off the ground. You sign that, and we can move past all this unpleasantness." My father nodded along in quiet approval, avoiding my eyes. Julian smirked, waiting for me to break. They truly believed they had stripped me of my dignity, backed me into a corner, and forced me into financial submission. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase resting beside my chair and pulled out a crisp, heavy navy folder. I placed it squarely over Evelyn's fake lease. "Before I sign yours, Evelyn," I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority, "you need to read mine." Evelyn chuckled condescendingly as she opened the navy folder, expecting a list of petty house rules. But as her eyes scanned the first page, the color completely drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "What is that, Evelyn?" my father asked, frowning as he leaned over to look. "This," I said, setting my hands flat on the mahogany table, "is a copy of the official property title deed registered with the county. As you can see on line 3, there is only one legal owner of this home, Clara Eleanor Davis. My grandmother willed this entire property directly to me when I turned 21. My father gasped, his eyes darting from the paper to me in sheer shock. "Clara, what are you talking about? I'm your father. This is the family home. You are allowed to live here rent-free out of my generosity," I replied coldly. "Generosity that ended the moment your wife illegally changed the locks on my room and dumped my possessions into the hallway." I leaned forward, pointing directly at Evelyn, whose hands were now visibly trembling. "And it gets better. Behind that deed is an official cease and desist letter sent directly to your real estate agent. I know about the illegal listing, Evelyn. Attempting to sell a property you do not own is grand fraud and real estate misrepresentation. My attorney has already notified the board, and if that listing isn't taken down by midnight, criminal charges will be filed." Julian stood up, slamming his chair back. "You can't just kick us out. We've lived here for 4 years. "Actually, Julian, I can," I said, pulling out 3 final, stamped legal sheets and sliding one to each of them. Underneath the fraud notice is an official 30-day notice to quit, drafted and signed by my attorney, Sarah Lynn. "You have 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate my property." Evelyn stared at the eviction notice, her arrogant demeanor completely shattering into panic. "Clara, please, we're your family. You can't leave your father homeless. You have 48 hours to restore my master suite, return my keys, and sign the eviction acknowledgement," I said, rising from my chair. "If you refuse, I will call the sheriff for unlawful detainer and press full criminal charges for fraud. You wanted me out of my room, Evelyn. Now you're all leaving my house." The 48 hours that followed were a chaotic storm of panic, anger, and desperation. Evelyn's first instinct was to wage a smear campaign against me. She called my extended family, wailing that I was a heartless, ungrateful daughter who was throwing her elderly father out into the cold streets over a simple family disagreement. However, as a corporate accountant, I knew that facts always defeat emotional spin. Before her narrative could take root, I composed a professional, single email to every relative in our family group chat. Attached were the property title deed, the tax receipts proving I'd paid every expense for 4 years, photos of my dumped possessions, and a screenshot of Evelyn's illegal real estate listing. Within an hour, the angry messages directed at me vanished, replaced by awkward silences and relatives quietly withdrawing their support from my father and Evelyn. Stripped of her allies and facing immediate criminal prosecution for real estate fraud, Evelyn finally broke. The smug, manipulative woman who had shattered a plate at my dinner table was gone, replaced by someone scrambling to avoid a courtroom. Julian was the first to run, packing his bags in the dead of night to crash on a friend's couch before his name could be dragged into the legal fallout. My father and Evelyn spent the next 3 weeks in absolute silence, hurriedly packing their life into rental trucks. They were forced to downsize to a modest, 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, a place they would actually have to pay for with their own limited funds. On the 30th day, I stood in the driveway as the last moving truck pulled away. I immediately had a locksmith replace every lock in the house with encrypted smart locks, installed high-definition security cameras around the perimeter, and walked back inside. The master suite was restored, clean and silent. Standing in the center of the room my grandmother had secured for me, I took my first deep breath in years, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of years of manipulation finally vanish forever. 6 months have passed since that quiet afternoon, and my life has transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. I still live in my grandmother's home, but it no longer feels like a battlefield. I've spent my weekends refinishing the hardwood floors, painting the walls in soft, warm tones, and bringing life back into the garden my grandmother loved so much. My relationship with my father remains distant. We speak occasionally, but the dynamic has permanently shifted. The illusion that he could allow his wife to mistreat me without consequences is completely broken. For the first time, I have firm, unbreakable boundaries, and my mental peace has skyrocketed because of it. Standing up to toxic family members is never easy. When people are used to walking all over you, setting a boundary feels like an attack to them. But protecting your hard work, your peace, and your dignity is never something you should apologize for. Now, I want to ask all of you watching, have you ever had a family member try to take advantage of your generosity or try to take something that belonged to you? How did you handle it, and did you have to enforce a strict boundary to protect yourself? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read through as many as I can, and your experiences might help someone else going through the exact same thing. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.